Hi everyone, how is everyone going? I hope you've been having amazing reads. Welcome back to the channel. My name's Andre and I'm your host of this bookworm channel where we all just hoard books and read them and comment about them. And today we have another book review, as you can already predict by what's next to me and also by the thumbnail and also by the title and all of that. But before I jump into that, don't forget, subscribe, like the content, comment away if you've read this book or not, and let's go for it. So, like I said, we're reviewing another book, still in the fantasy realm. We've been in fantasy for a long time. I should read some science fiction, but that will come later. Either way, today we have this book, which is The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. And relax, I am not jumping into another series, or at least I think I'm not, because when I read this, I thought it was a standalone, and technically it should still be, but I'll talk more about it soon. This book was published in 2020, and right off the bat, it got nominated for plenty of awards, and it won some of them. One of the awards it got mentioned, but it didn't win it, was the Goodreads Choice Awards for the fantasy section, but we know that the Goodreads are awards that are more popularity instead of quality, so not winning that didn't really damage my interest in reading this book, but the fact that it was nominated for a lot of them spiked my interest. Plus, it was also a recommendation from a friend of mine, so of course I got interested in reading, but purely based on that. But then another thing I noticed when I started looking more into this book was that on Goodreads, this book has over 650,000 ratings. That's more than 500,000 people that have read this book and rated it. And you would think, okay, so many people have rated it, maybe the score isn't that great because you got the people that liked it, the people that didn't like it, and the middle ground. But the fact is that this book has a score of 4.4 out of 5, which is astounding considering that more than 500,000 people have rated this book. But that just means that this book is indeed really good, and therefore my interest was even bigger to read it, and finally I picked it up. But so for the curious ones, what is this book about? This is a cozy fantasy, and like I mentioned earlier in the video, this was supposed to be a standalone novel, and it can be read as one. I read it not even knowing that there was going to be a second book, and I was fully glad that I read it like that because it is a self-contained story. But it is true, there is a second book coming soon that will continue the adventure of these characters. However, I truly believe you can read just this one and be happy with that. If you're still curious to know what this particular book is about, then stick around for the synopsis. For the ones that are allergic to spoilers, then I'll have the timestamp around so you can skip the synopsis and jump right into the review of the book. But if you want to first see what this book is about, stick around and let's find out. He expected nothing, but they gave him everything. Linus Baker leads a quiet life. At 40, he has a tiny house with a devious cat and his beloved records for company. And at the department in charge of magical youth, he spent many dull years monitoring their orphanages. Then one day, Linus is summoned by extremely upper management and gives a highly classified assignment. He must travel to an orphanage where 6 dangerous children reside, including the Antichrist. There, Linus must somehow determine if they could bring on the end of days. But their guardian, charming and enigmatic Arthur Parnassus, will do anything to protect his wards. As Arthur and Linus grow ever closer, Linus must choose between duty and his dreams. Okie dokie, now with the synopsis out of the way, let's start with our review. And of course, we're gonna start with our category of plot. I think the plot of this book does not try to be anything that it isn't, which I truly appreciate. Being in the cozy fantasy subgenre, we know that this book won't have end of days kind of stakes regarding the danger and damage or the pain that the characters must suffer. But don't get me wrong, there are still stakes involved, but at the same time you cannot predict the ending will be quite satisfying and quite pleasing in the sense that it won't feel like someone is ripping your heart apart from death of characters or from something else like that. And this might seem that I'm saying that the plot is predictable. I don't think it is. The plot had several twists and turns that I was not predicting and that I got pleasantly surprised. And of course, there were some surprises here and there that would just make me appreciate the characters and the reading and the author himself, but also it would make me laugh and chuckle sometimes and just be happy for the characters. And I think that's just as important as you feeling betrayed or shocked by what characters do in other books like grimdark or like epic fantasy. You have to have that range in books. So I think for the plot, for the ability to be surprising while still be contained within the cozy fantasy, feeling all that this subgenre should do, I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 5. As for characters, same thing applies really. With the subgenre of cozy fantasy, you don't expect these characters to have such deep, complex issues and dilemmas within themselves. They should be quite, not simple, but not stereotypical, but also not overly complex. They should be in the middle ground, and I think these characters were that middle ground. And it was truly an enjoyment to read about them and see them interact with each other. And I think especially the children characters, because children can be quite annoying to write, can be done very badly and quickly bore the reader, and I don't think that this happened with any of the children, and there were a lot of them. I think TJ Klune was able to write each one of these with extreme caution while remaining true to what a child should be, but at the same time a magical child. So there's that balance, and I think TJ Klune balanced it very, very well. I think the only thing I would criticize, and it's not really a big criticism, is that I wish there were more pages so that we could see these characters interact more with each other, because I felt that we didn't get enough. We did get it quite a bit, but I feel like between the children and between other characters, there wasn't as much interaction as I would like. But still, it's just a minor inconvenience. And so for this category, I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 5 as well. Now, as for world building, and this one was interesting because this book feels that on one side it is set in our world, but then it has there's a sufficiently number of things that makes me think it is its own universe, aside from, of course, having magical children. And this, instead of making me alienated because I couldn't exactly pinpoint, I think TJ Klune was able to play with this familiarity and strangeness at the same time so well that it got me engaged all the time. And of course, with the introduction of magical creatures and children, then you always get that excitement. It's almost like the X-Men or Heroes, the TV show, where you always want to find out what are their powers, what are their limitations, what range of people with magical powers exist, and what can they do. So I think this category is another one that deserves a 4 out of 5, not a 5 simply because I also felt that this world was a bit empty in its life, the world itself, because we only visit 2 places, and one place is very well described and it's the center point of our story, but the other place felt almost like a cardboard background, and I couldn't really get much personality from it, and of course from the rest of the world, even less. What about writing style? This was also an interesting one, and I think it was strange because going back to the familiarity versus strangeness, I think we get a lot of the strangeness from this writing style that feels almost like a series of unfortunate events by Lemony Snicket, where there's this awkwardness, this randomness, absurdism that is almost dark, but still for children. It's a weird combination. I don't know if you've ever read that series. I recommend it. It's fun. And I have never read anything else that style aside from Terry Pratchett. And that leads me to the familiarity of it, because the comforting parts and the funny parts gave me a lot of Terry Pratchett vibes. And so we have this light side from Terry Pratchett and this dark side from Lemony Snicket combined into one book to give this mix of writing style versus themes versus world that were giving this combination. And it was really interesting to see and also to explore and to read, because I have never read anything exactly like this. And of course, that's why we read books, to explore these new worlds, these new ways of writing. And so I think that was very well done. Aside from that, it was a fun book, fun and funny, and it was a good book in regards to pacing. There was always something happening. Even in the slower parts, it was still engaging, and it still got me very interested to read the next page. So for this category, I'm gonna give it a 5 out of 5. And enjoyment, our last category, I gotta say that I enjoyed this book a lot. It was exactly what I needed to read between all the epic fantasy books that I was reading. And I think this is a perfect example where even though the characters, the plot, the world building aren't excellent, astounding, mind-blowing, the enjoyment I get out of this book is still perfect. It's still a book that was making me feel engaged in it, that made me feel I want to read more about it and to know more about it. It made sure that I still got an experience that I loved. When I was reading, I was always happy to go back to this world and read more. And of course, after reading this book and knowing that there's a second book coming out, I'm more than happy to jump into this world again and continue reading more about it. And of course, after reading this book, I'm also going to read other books by TJ Klune because I want to see what else this author has to offer. So for this category, it's going to be a 5 out of 5. And this leads us to the end of our review. So just as a refresher, we have 4 for plot, 4 for characters, 4 for world building, and then 5 for writing style and 5 for enjoyment. And this gives us a final score of 4.4 out of 5. So it's exactly what we got on Goodreads as well. So I think like the average population for this book, which is my honest opinion and a good recommendation for you. I think this is a really good cozy fantasy. Of course, this is the only cozy fantasy I've read, so I don't have a lot to go by, but I'm trying to make sure that I will solve that issue by reading more cozy fantasy in the future. But so far, yeah, if you want something nice, fuzzy, warm, that's set with a world that seems like ours, but it isn't exactly, so it's like this in between of fiction, non-fiction, then this can be a perfect book for you. But I want to know if you've read it, then what do you think about it? Comment down below, let me know your score, or if you haven't read it, but you've read other TJ Klune books or other cozy fantasy books, let me know what recommendations are there, what should I read next, and aside from that, if you're new, subscribe, like the content, and I'll be seeing you on Thursdays and Sundays, okay? Ciao!